Abolitionist for Everybody is a podcast that tackles the sometimes difficult conversations around prison abolition. I'm Crystal.
And I'm Graham. This season is all about the journey of incarceration, from arrests to sentencing, family connections, parole hearings, and reentry.
Just a reminder, friends, though the title of this episode may give you some warning, remember that harm itself tends to create situations of alternate harms.
There will likely be other painful topics brought up too. Take care of you.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Abolitionist for Everybody. On this episode, we will be talking about all the challenges in maintaining family connections with our incarcerated loved ones like myself and Sandra, who is one of our guests today. And for some, maintaining those connections during incarceration, like my co-host Graham and our other guest, Jesse. Sandra and Jesse, welcome to Abolitionist for Everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourselves and your story and why you're here today?
So my name is Sandra Suarez, and we are here today to share our experience as parents of a 5-year-old growing up in the prison system. And I thank you both for having us. And this is my husband, Jesse.
And my name's Jesse Suarez, and I'm here to share the same experience, but from the viewpoint of a male who just got out of prison from doing a long time and who is learning how to become and be a man and a father and a normal citizen in society. A lot of these things are new to me, and I would like to share that with the public.
Thank you both so much for being here, and welcome home, Jesse. As Sandra was introducing herself, Jesse had like the biggest smile looking at her. So for those of you who are listening, I wanted to make sure I painted the picture for you all. So when talking about abolition and family connections, everything is so intertwined and there's so much that we can talk about. But I thought it'd be a good idea if we start kind of from the beginning of y'all's journeys through incarceration, of all of our journeys through incarceration, beginning with Jesse, Graham, Sandra, when you were arrested, and then just as you went through incarceration and now that you're home, what does family connections look like to you and your loved ones? So if we can take it back a little bit, I know for myself too, my loved one has been incarcerated for 5 years. So I'm going to jog my memory of what it was like when y'all were first incarcerated, going through trial, if you went through trial, or if you took a plea, like those first few months or years of your incarceration.
Yes. Going through the whole court system, a lot of people always have the hope that they're going to get out. So a lot of the future, you're really not contemplating it too much. You're thinking that you're going to get out, and then 1 year turns into 2, 3, 4. And next thing you know, you end up with a big sentence. And then you're still hopeful, depending on your situation, if you're going to get out or not. In my situation, I never stopped fighting, took it all the way to the federal courts. I fought the whole time I was in prison, which was about 10 and a half years. But when I met my wife in 2015, I just knew that we're going to have a family. And then again, you don't really think about the future too much because you're in the moment, especially in prison. The visits, it's in the moment. The letters, it's in the moment. And like I said, we knew that we're going to have a family. We got married, started having family visits. But once my daughter was here, everything changed. And now, and still, every appeal that I submitted, this is the one. And year, 2 years. So it was about 3 years when I started praying to Jesus Christ. I was like, I don't want it to hit her. She's been visiting me since she was, 3 weeks old? And she was 3 now, and I'm like, I don't want it. And she knows that I'm there. I just didn't want it to hit her, like as far as a kid going to elementary and saying my dad's in prison and feeling a certain type of way. But by the grace of God, she's not going to have to go through that. Though she always says, yeah, when you were in jail, when you were in prison, when we visited you, I know where you were, but I'm here now. And I just thank God. I thank God that he pulled me through. But that's the power of faith, that you keep on going, you keep on hoping, and you do it in the present. And he pulled me through, and now I'm here with my family.
I love that you're transparent and were transparent with your daughter in regards to your incarceration, and that it's an open conversation, because there's such a stigma around it that oftentimes, like I have a friend right now who his daughter thinks that he's off to work. He's got a pretty lengthy sentence and he's just working out of state. And I really appreciate that. So I guess my question would be, at what point, for me, let me preface it with this. For me, it was about 5 years in that I settled into the groove of the time that I was doing. And up until that point, I didn't know what was going to happen. And about 5 years in, I settled into the groove and figured out a routine that built around outside connections and what I was doing inside. How long did it take for you?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, right? Because I would always tell certain individuals, well, for those who haven't done time or a lot of time, usually it's like 3 stages. The first time I did 7 years, it's like you start and you're like 2 year mark, you're starting to get comfortable. 4 years, you're like on top of the hill. And then the last 2 years, everybody knows I'm going downhill. And you're trying to stay out of the way, your hands are up, you're kicking back. And for me, because I never received my sentence, I never accepted it, though I was there. My case wasn't fully closed because my appeal was always open. Therefore, that means that you're really not sentenced all the way. As long as your case is still open, your sentence is not final. And that's why when new laws come out, you qualify for them. And since I never stopped fighting, I never got comfortable. So I was never able to enter that phase of getting comfortable and going downhill. And I would tell people that I was in 14 years and I felt like I hadn't even got started yet because I never got comfortable because I was fighting so much in the court system. And I just spoke with an individual today and I let him know, I said, it's going to be a journey. I got motions, petitions, letters, over 100 of them, easy denied. But that was my thing. I never got comfortable.
I feel like as someone who has an incarcerated loved one is like, do you ever get comfortable? And then I'm also curious to know, Sandra, I know a lot of, my brother's incarcerated. Your loved one was incarcerated for a while. What it is that you do on the outside to provide more comfort for your loved one on the inside, more love, more peace, more like connection. And I know one of them that came up already is visits. So if you can tell a little bit more to our listeners what that's like having, visiting your loved one inside and then having a daughter, because my brother's, as I've shared in the podcast, this is my brother's second incarceration. He didn't have a kid the first time he was incarcerated. We didn't see him for 5 years in his first incarceration. I saw him when he was arrested, and then I saw him again when he came home. And I see the psychological difference, I would say, now that he has a daughter. She's currently 5 and hasn't seen him for like years. And Graham also, she's 5, she's smart, but she also thinks Papi is working. So just curious to know, Sandra, like, what's that like through your perspective?
So what it's like, I still to this day, when you said that he looked at me and he was smiling. So the very first time I visited him was at the county and he was going through resentencing. And I'll never forget when I walked up and I saw him, he was like shining. It was weird, right? But he's a handsome man, but he was like, I just can't explain it. At that time, I was going through my own, through our own storms. And when I walked up, his smile was so comforting that somehow I knew things were going to be just fine. And from that day forward, I made it a point to stay committed, to stay faithful. And if this was something that I was going to want, then I was going to make sure to show up. And so I have a weird way, and he'll probably say it, I have a weird way of how I do things, and that's showing up. A lot of the times we can write 100 letters, and they're important. Don't get me wrong. Letters are important, communication's important, but I made sure to show up at visit. I made sure to show up at family visit, made sure to pick up the phone, make sure that I didn't disappear on him. So I just stayed faithful and committed because that's something I was taught as a child. And I grew up in a troubled home. And so when he was transferred from county, I was there almost every weekend to back to prison, I was denied my first visit over an omission. And so then I had to go through a whole mission that I was going to stay committed and get my record expunged, not over, like I said, over, that's a whole nother story. But I got my record expunged. I made sure I showed up the first visit. I didn't know I was going to get denied. So when he called me on the phone, I was crying. And he's like, "Why are you crying?" I'm like, "Because they won't let me in." And that was my first very prison visit ever. And it was totally different. And the way you were talked to or treated was totally different. And so I just knew that we were going to get married, that we were going to be together, and he brought me peace. And so I would seek that peace, seek that presence, and just to be with him. And what's important to me was it wasn't all, he wouldn't sugarcoat me, but tell me how things, how I was a queen and how I'm going to make it. And just overall, because I was out here alone in California, then, from our regular visits, we ended up getting married. And then we had our first family visits. And that's, again, another story in itself. But then we conceived our daughter. And when I conceived Zoe, I didn't know I was pregnant until I was 6 months along. I just made sure that another journey began, with her, to stay committed and to tell her the truth and to tell her, this is your father and he is where he is. And I've never lied to her. I've always told her the truth because I didn't want for her to one day say to me, "Why did you lie to me?" And we trust me, we've been through the fire, the storm, the rain, the hail, you name the storm, and we were there.
I appreciate what you shared. I wanted to ask kind of, because I know personally, but for our viewers, because when our listeners hear, "Oh, well, I visited every weekend," they might dismiss the amount of distance and what goes into a visit. And I know firsthand, so y'all know firsthand, can you explain that process a little bit? What goes into getting ready for a visit, going to a visit, going through the guards, etc.?
Don't make me cry, because I will. You don't even know. So he was at Lancaster. He was at Lancaster prison. By the grace of God, I say that because that was an hour and about 45 minutes. So an hour and 45 minutes turned well over into a 3.5 hour drive. So I would visit Saturday or Sunday or both at some point when I was pregnant, because I knew the season was going to come where I wasn't going to see him as often. So I would get up at 4 a.m, get myself ready, dressed, make sure we had the dollars and the quarters for the vending machines, make sure the gas was in the car. And this was when I was doing it by myself, when I wasn't pregnant. And I would make sure, to get there an hour ahead of time in case there was any accidents, depending on the weather. Once I would get to the gate, again, I was pretty quick with the appointments because now it's a big old hassle. So I would be there, and then they give you your pass. If you have an appointment, it would be one color. If you didn't, you would get a walk-in pass, which would be white. Depending if you're walking, then you can sit there up to hours before you go in and see, the person that you're visiting. Then when you get into visits, you have to turn in your pass. And I boast on, usually I would be between 1 and 5. And if I wasn't 1 or 2, I would be stressing out, right? So then from there, you have to go through the whole process. You have to take off your shoes, take off your jackets, empty out your pockets, put your hands, around your waistband, make sure nothing's there, pass the x-ray machine, and, go through the process again, put it back on, walk yourself he was in a yard, so you would walk a little distance and check in for visit. There was a couple of times where the officers forgot to call him. So I would sit there, and then I would get up a couple times. And so there was a couple times where I waited like an hour because they forgot to call him. That's the process, just me by myself. You let me know when you're ready to hear the process with Zoe, because that's a whole nother ballgame.
Yeah, I think when the first time I ever visited my brother during his second incarceration, he was at the county jail, and I will never forget. It was like 2, 3 days after he was arrested. And I was sitting trying to eat. Like my parents sat me down and they're like, you have to eat something. And I remember my whole body shaking as I was trying to eat. My whole body was shaking. And I saw from my peripheral, like from the side of my eyes, that my dad was staring at me. And I was like, oh, I'm so cold. It's just so cold in here. And we both knew I was lying. But the first time I visited was definitely like the scariest. And I drove like 2 hours for 15 minutes through the glass, through the phones, 8 p.m. at night. And then after those 15 minutes, they kicked me out and I had to drive back. And then the first time I visited, like actually inside, we also get up at like 2, 3 in the morning, drive like 5 hours, visit from 9 to 3 p.m., I think it was for us, and then have to drive back. And there's been times like there's a lot of policing about what people, especially women, what we wear. There's been a time where it slipped my mind and my shoulders were showing. So I was running around asking people if I can borrow their sweater so that I can see my brother that day. And one thing too that I experienced was just how exhausted and drained I was. Like just emotionally, psychologically, didn't know when I was going to see my loved one again, didn't know if the next time he was going to be further. And then you add on top of that the little ones, like having to take the little ones and experience that. But one thing that I'm curious about that I've always wondered and I've never asked anybody. So Jesse and Graham, I'm curious, what's it like on the other side? Because this is something that my brother doesn't really talk about with me. Only one time there was somebody who was incarcerated with him that came home. And one time he mentioned like my brother saying, my sister's visited, and like having a big smile for a couple of days. I'm wondering what it's like receiving a visit. And then Graham, curious your experience because I know you were in the shoe. And for those who don't know, that's solitary confinement, wondering what your experience was like with family connections and visits while you were in the shoe for so long.
Well, my first term, I did 7 years, and I didn't really have a steady relationship. I would get visits from friends, and it was just like fun. I would even try my hardest to get other guys pulled out. And then it was something that you could boast about. Oh, I pulled out 2 guys, or so I was always on it, but I knew that I was on my way out. 7 years when you're in there, in a 4 yard, or even in the shoe. I had 7 years, and I believe I was like one of two who weren't lifers. So you always try to do something good for those around you, especially your close ones. And that's how I felt that I could give back by getting them a pen pal or whatever. But as you get older, those visits are very important. They're instrumental because the way that I seen my wife, we were partners and we're doing this together. There's laughter, there's tears, there's a lot of growth. There's a lot of growth. What I can say is that 7, 8 hours, it's never enough. And we're lucky because a lot of prisons, you don't, they say that's how long the visits are, but because of the capacity, and I know now in a lot of prisons they give you it's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, but for a lot of years, for about 20 years, you could only get them Saturday and Sunday. So the closer you were to a big city, you could imagine the amount of people that would fill those visiting rooms. So sometimes we would be lucky if we got 2 hours. So imagine trying to do all of that and eat your burger at the same time. And then once we had Zoe, it was Zoe time too. So, but it got better towards the end with the amount of time. Sometimes I would really go, this is what I have to get through. We have to speak about this. We have to speak about that. And we had a lot going. We had a lot going. She had a lot going because she was out here.
That's awesome. I remember so prior to the shoe, I received visits and it was about if I was to evaluate a time, I'd say it was like a 6-year span. And then I started seeing people drop off, my homeboys and friends and family, like life moved on. I often compared myself to a ghost. Like it was like I'm watching the world move on, but I can still communicate with them, but they communicate less. People are getting married, people are having kids. And so I remember that sensation, but a visit was like a separation from everything that was going on. Like I was politically involved. So everything that was going on with that, visiting rooms were no fly zones. So like a lot of the stuff got suspended and you were just out there with your people. During the SHU, I did not get visits. And in fact, over that 8-year span, people dropped off. But after the SHU, I remember sitting out there and it was a wholly different experience. Like my hypervigilance had kicked in much more. And I remember sitting with my partner at the time, and I was sitting across from the table and I was watching everything that was happening around. And she was upset. Like, why aren't you paying attention to me? I said, I am paying attention to you, but I'm also paying attention to everything that's happening around you. And there was no way that I could turn that dial off. I still struggle with that to this day. And I attribute that to the SHU and PTSD and all of that. But I remember the sense that, like, and Jesse, you probably relate to this, where you get like that old pair of boots and you get them all shined up and you get your visiting clothes, you put them underneath a plastic bag, a trash bag, get them all ironed and creased. And you're like, man, I look fly. I look good in this. And they don't notice. They don't notice because it's just blues to everybody outside of prison. But to us, we feel like we're dialed in. Like, I've got my toes are shining on my boots and my creases are right down the side of the blue shirt. I got a button up. They're like, what the hell? It's just it's a prison smock. It doesn't mean anything. Dude, was that your experience?
Real quick, one time my brother was upset with me because I randomly visited without telling him first. And he was so upset because he's like, I didn't get a haircut. You should have told me my hair's not done. And so now I hear y'all's perspective. I'm like, oh, okay, that it's very important for y'all.
I totally agree. And I would take it a step further because not everybody gets visits every weekend. But whether you get them every weekend or you don't, and it's like you would only know it if you've done time. If somebody goes out there and they're not at their best, it's like, well, they get the eye, like, bro, you go out there all wrinkled, like, so uncool, right? But to go out there, it is your freedom. You're not in prison no more. It's like you entered the Bermuda Triangle, you're somewhere else. And you're going out there and says, it's the freedom, you're gonna wear your best. It's like going to the Grammys. Believe it or not, you're going to wear your best. You're gonna take so it's the preparation. Even sometimes your clothes is ironed. If you don't get visits like that, your clothes is ironed the week before. Fresh. You don't want dust getting on it. In 180, well, back in the days, because we were able to get cologne oils, but I remember there was a time when they didn't have none of that in the real high levels. I see you have to wear the cologne from the magazines, and you rub it on your clothes. And Graham's laughing because that's how. And you would get those peel them off the magazine and put them on your clothes, rub them on the clothes, and they really do make a difference. And I remember once I'm walking to the visiting room and I'm rubbing it on my clothing, and the guy's like, "Let me get some." So I'm like, "Here." He licks it. He licks it and then and I was like, "Wow, wow!" But those are the things and the extremes that we go to feel free. You want to go out there dressed nice, smelling good, and to be presentable for who? For your loved ones, and also to get that sense of a few hours of freedom.
That's exactly what it feels like, is a few hours of freedom. And I remember the little magazine tear outs from Maxim and stuff.
Yeah.
I did not know that. I remember one time, oh gosh, I can't believe I'm gonna say this in a podcast, but I remember one time when I went to it, I feel like for me it's different because it's just my brother, you know. But one time I went and then he's like, oh my gosh, he's like, you didn't wash your shoes. He's like, your shoes do not look clean. I can't believe you came to visiting like this. And I was like, I woke up at 2 a.m. What do you mean? And he's like, I've been standing up all morning, so my thing doesn't get, like, my clothes doesn't get wrinkled. So I love hearing y'all's perspective now. One of the things that stood out to me while you were talking, Jesse, is how creative y'all are. And one of the things that I think about a lot is that abolition does require creativity. And I know that staying connected to your loved ones is so difficult. It's so expensive. And I'm wondering, Sandra, what are some of the creative things, or both of everyone, what are some of the creative things y'all have done in order to stay connected to your loved ones? And then also wondering what that looks like in times of hardship, when things are hard. Because as Jesse said, Graham said, like, life keeps happening. And I know with my loved ones specifically, we sat down and we talked about, how would I tell him if a loved one were to pass away. And it's happened, right? He's lost a lot of loved ones on the inside, and we have like a whole plan for that. So wondering what that's been like for you all too.
So I'll start by saying that to, the experience that how do you tell someone that, you lost a loved one, or like in our case is that we had our first family visit. I was always told that I couldn't have kids, or I wasn't going to have kids, right? And so I just, I was okay with it after a while, though I would pray about it and cry about it, but still kept going. And so our first family visit, I ended up getting pregnant, and I felt weird, the first few weeks, and I had never been pregnant like that. And so I ended up going to the doctors. They did an ultrasound, and they're like, "You're pregnant." And I was like, "What? Like, I'm pregnant?" And so I looked at it like, wow, what a miracle, I'm pregnant. So I told him, when he called on the phone, I was like, "Hey, I'm pregnant. I'm going to be almost 3 months." And I didn't even know, right? We didn't even know. However, I was told it was a high risk pregnancy because of the way that the baby or the little fetus was already in the picture. And so I wasn't feeling good. I was still going to visit. I would make sure I was showing up, but I couldn't eat that much at that time. And then I felt really sick one day, and I ended up in the hospital. He had, how sometimes they do lockdowns and you can't call out. And so he didn't call me until the next morning. He called, and I was at the hospital, and I had lost the baby. And so I went through that process by myself at the hospital. And again, I was out here by myself. So I didn't have anyone to call, to tell, come sit with me, nothing. So I went through that process by myself. And so when he calls, he knew something was wrong because I was crying off the bat. And then he goes, "What's going on? What's happening?" And so I told him that I lost a baby, and I just, for weeks, I kept crying. And I didn't even give him a chance to grieve. And to this day, I never even, actually, I'm sorry, I never even asked him, "How did you feel?" or anything like that. Or I just didn't think. And as you could tell, I still kind of struggle with that, right? But on the flip side and the good side of that is that not even 3 months down the line, I didn't even know I had got pregnant with Zoe. And our second family visit, I got pregnant. And those visits it was 120 days later. So I got pregnant with Zoe. I didn't know I was pregnant with her. I had got sick, E. coli poisoning. I lost weight. I couldn't eat. And so the way I found out about her was exactly the same way. They did an ultrasound, but the difference was that she was 6 months. She had a head, hands, a body, and they're like, "You're sick because you're pregnant." And so they turned, the screen, and I was able to see that she was there. And I only had 3 months to prepare, but all along he knew I was pregnant. All along he knew, and he kept telling me that it was a girl, "You're pregnant," and he would even pray for me. And in my head, I would be like, "This dude's crazy, and I'm just fat," That's what I would say. But at the end of the day, those phone calls and keeping that connection of of how we lost our first one, but yet how we had her, what is and was so important to this day, because those are our connection. That was our lifeline, and going to visits, the financial cost of it, it was just me and him. It wasn't so bad because I would manage somehow. I wouldn't go out. I would budget, make sure I did what I could to have food to help him, while he was in there, our visiting food. We easily would spend about 300 to 400, I want to say 300 to 400 a month for visits alone. That's not including the almost $500 on family visits, because everything has to be sealed. Nothing could be open. You have to order your packaged food. You have to order your fresh food. But then when Zoe came, it's a whole nother thing, because not only my stuff had to be sealed, now her stuff has to be sealed. Her baby formula, her Pampers, her clothing, her everything, soap, her, what is that called, her pacifier. And so the cost ended up going from each family visit from 400 to 500 when it was just us, to her almost 600, 650 each visit, each family visit. And so it's, the prices are crazy and they're ridiculous, but somehow we managed, by the grace of God, because I knew it was important to go see him, and especially for her to meet him. She was only 40 days old at our first family visit with her. 40 days old, and there I go, right? Taking her.
I have a question in regards to something that came up for me. So you mentioned phone calls and being on lockdown, and him not being able to call you at a very crucial time. So during phases like that, like what was it? I guess this question's for you, Jesse. What was the strain on you? And I'm speaking from a direct experience. My partner at the time got in a car accident after leaving visit once. And I was messing with cell phones back then. So I was calling, and it wasn't going through. And I remember it was between count time after visit to chow. And I just knew, like I intuitively knew something was wrong. There's something not right about what's happening. And sure enough, she had been in a car accident and got T-boned by a big rig truck on the way home. And so I'm wondering, like, what was that experience like for you during both like that lockdown and also other lockdowns where you had to be restricted from being able to connect with Sandra?
Towards the end and recently, they've had the things where they'll lock you down, but they won't take away the visits. It has to be something. But I mean, 20 years ago, it was different. I think, and luckily, she came towards the end of my sentence, where even now, when they lock you down, it's like they'll resume it, at least modified showers and phone calls after like 3 days. I think that's probably the longest we went through. Back then, at least for me, I would have stipulated that rule, but I didn't have nobody serious. But even when she came into the picture, like, you don't socialize with everybody. All this making friends and little cliques with girls, and no way. You have to do things a certain way and use wisdom. And by being in there a long time, you kind of know what goes on. And I'll share with you guys that when she started the support group, Jesse's Place, that's how I began, with a support group. And she kept on telling me, I'm going to start it. I'm going to start it. I'm going to start it. I finally said, you want to know what I think about this group? And she said, she was kind of quiet. And I was like, if you want to start it, start it. But as far as I know, all those groups, it's nothing but gossipers. And that's what sometimes people think. And it's a misconception, because look at what it turned into. Look at what it turned into. And that's why I say that times have changed. And now the reason why I brought that up, that times have changed, is because she was able to make alliances with other females who were strong about getting their loved ones released and who knew a little bit more about the prison system. And when we would be on lockdown, she would find out through other people. So it wasn't too much like she's alone and she's in the blind. I remember once I was in the yard and a guy runs up to me, Jesse, my wife told me to tell you that your wife told her that she's in the hospital right now. So I got a telegram through the yard. Why? Because of the support system that the families are able to build out there. But it was never, we never went a big stretch without communicating. However, you mentioned something that you intuitively knew that something was wrong. And when you have a partner, a loved one, and you guys are really connected, you guys are really connected, like every day. You guys, in a sense, you guys are one spirit. You guys are one spirit, and we're one spirit with each other. And so she would know when something was wrong, and I would know when something was wrong.
That's beautiful. I'm thinking about what you said about like the culture inside being super suspicious. I remember telling my partner, I don't trust that situation. Let's stay away from that. Let's not talk to those people, all of those things. And she would tell me the same thing. And I feel like that's almost like systemically designed in, similar to how we don't fight anything and visit because we don't want to upset the status quo, but the status quo is completely messed up and usually limits us and our loved ones right? And I remember it was probably about 2000 when we got out of the shoe, about 2013, 14, and people started gathering more and communicating stuff. And it was better than any gang network I had ever been involved in. Like I knew stuff that was going on in the street and legislation that was happening and how to fight and what guards we were targeting for, not for assault, but for like 602s, group 602s. And it became a really collective effort. And that's when it got beautiful. It was like watching the wall come down that I feel like, honestly, the system they designed us to be suspicious of one another. They designed us to not push back against them and to focus on each other. And then once we stopped doing that, we were able to unite more and get some traction on some of the stuff we were working on. And because of that collective energy and because of the organizing process, just at grassroots level, we have things like Prop 57, free phone calls, the process for building out tablets throughout the entire state, the process for bringing down canteen prices, even though they're still high. I'll be honest, they're still high. I saw a list recently. All of those things are because people are talking and joining these family councils and getting engaged collectively to fight back against various forms of oppression.
Yeah, that's very powerful, Graham. One of the things that I realized right away was the intentionality of the system as well. So, Sandra, I've heard you mention that throughout the episode. Like, oh, that's a whole other story. This other thing is a whole other story. And one of the quotes that I want to share is a book that I'm currently reading, and it's called Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. And in it, he writes that, quote, in the history of the nation, there has only been one other state-sponsored initiative more anti-family than mass incarceration, and that is slavery. He also says that, quote, by the time that they're in their mid-30s, almost 7 in 10 Black men who didn't finish high school will spend a portion of their life in a cage, end quote. And that is something that when I go into a visitor room, I think one of the most heartbreaking and traumatic things that I've experienced with the system is visits. Looking around the room and seeing a little boy tell mommy to unlock the door so that papi can come home with them. Or a mother desperately asking for the health of their loved one because they haven't heard of them in a while, or they seem a little bit more depressed during a certain season. So I think one of the things that is always, always heavy on my heart is people around me. So Sandra, I always kudos to you for turning that into advocacy. Because another stat that I think about often, and I recently shared this on my socials, and a lot of people who didn't know about it responded to me and were shocked. A lot of formerly incarcerated people too. And that is that for each year that someone is in prison takes 2 years off their life expectancy. And for those of us who have loved ones inside, we have a life expectancy of 2.6 years shorter than those who don't have loved ones inside. And that is one thing that, when thinking about abolition, I think about a lot. And that's one of the things that breaks my heart. And to be honest with y'all and our listeners, that's something that just like makes me angry. So aside from the ridiculous $800 that you had to spend just so that you can, be with your loved ones for one weekend, is just like the deep effects that it has on our health, our psychology, and just like generations. And when you look around a visiting room, or even when I've done prison workshops, it's Black and brown people, mostly BIPOC people. So that is one thing that I do encourage the listeners to think about, and would love to hear y'all's thoughts, is like, when we're talking about family connections and the disintegration of the family in the US, who are those groups of folks who are being affected by this?
That's heavy. I didn't know that statistic until I saw it. That's really heavy. I was doing the math while you were talking, Crystal. I was like, uh-oh. 2 years for every year, that's 40 years off my life. That's heavy. I think on like a upward shift, like the family connection is the key to, like, statistics show that you're less likely to reoffend if you are connected via phone calls, visits, mail, correspondence. You're less likely to go back because you have a solid root. I think like the systemic flaw or the systemic design, if you will, is that they make all of those things difficult. And Jesse and Sandra, maybe you can give me a little bit of insight on your experience of this. But I know that phone calls, if like there's one list that goes around and you get on that list where it's open and hopefully it's starting near your cell because your loved one is working and you have this very small window of time in which you can reach them. And so you have to get in this little window of time through 150 other people, or like visits. I mean, I've had visits canceled because of overcrowding. I've had received write-ups for excessive contact and had my visits restricted. Mail and correspondence. My mail was constantly in IGI's office, so I'd get a stack of mail once every 3 months with a rubber band around it. And so like it was really difficult to maintain that contact, but we fight through it. I'm curious about, I'm sharing a lot about my personal story, but I'm curious about y'all's experience with those things.
For me, a lot of my day revolved around that one phone call and scheduling it. However, things have gotten better. The system, by far, it's not the same system that it was 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, especially with the tablets. Right before the tablets in a lot of prisons, they added 2 or 3 more phones, and they started to give you phone calls twice a day. But even twice a day wasn't enough for me. It wasn't enough for me. My schedule revolved around speaking to her on the phone. Like I stated, we were doing life together. So when you talk about the time that's taken off a person's life, I could see how, because they are really tied to us. And I'm not sure why that happens, but maybe it's because they're being depleted of something that they actually need in their life. And that's their loved one that's incarcerated, something that we can't see, but it's spiritually there. And for me, it was difficult. And then there's other issues that go along with that phone call. When for whatever reason the cops don't let you out at every minute counts. You're talking about a 15-minute phone call, every single minute counts. And sometimes the phones are down or somebody's right there arguing with their loved one. And everything, you have to use wisdom. You're in prison. You have to use wisdom, that a little situation like that could turn into something big. And therefore, you have to tread carefully and gauge the situations. You know, there's certain situations that you just know, like right now is not the time. And that's where patience comes in, wisdom, maturity. But just to hear the voice, like my wife stated, when I heard her voice, I knew something was wrong. And that's amazing how you could hear somebody's voice and they could say nothing's wrong. You're like, what is it? Just as soon as you hear the words, it's probably the way your brain's designed your heart, and it picks up on the frequencies. There's power in communication. There's power in communication, and we need to keep that those veins and those bloodlines, those arteries open as much as possible, especially for the children. So we have the Place for Grace that's now entering new facilities and expanding their programs. That's beautiful. That is totally revolutionary. Their day camp, and I champion that the Place for Grace continues, and that other organizations rise up and start doing things and programming for the kids and for the parents too. I was able to raise my daughter through stick figures. I potty trained her through stick figures. My wife was too busy to read those letters. I know she was. So I said, you know what? Just give her the letter and my daughter will figure it out. And she did. She got potty trained through stick figures. But yes, that line of communication is very important.
I think like on a physiological level, when a person is deprived, like their senses are deprived, like let's say your eyes are covered over a period of time, your hearing will heighten. Your other senses heighten as other ones are depleted. And I think that like because of the human need for connection and companionship, essentially, like that distance between us, hundreds of miles, barbed wire fences, cell doors, all of the yard politics, all of the stuff out there, the 9 to 5 for the partner, like you are able to pick up on the vibrations of their emotion. I don't have the science behind that, so I can't give solid statistics, but I believe like the same way on the yard, you can feel a riot Like you can feel it coming in the air. You watch people, all those dudes got boots on up, and then you
Yep.
feel it like you could cut through the air like butter, is what I always said in there. It feels like butter. You could cut through the air like it's butter. And it's the same thing with your loved one's emotional state. It's the exact same thing when things are happening outside. It's really like psychologically phenomenal.
Beautiful because you're getting also a chance to speak about your truth, and it's, you know, your experience. You know, for us, the irony of things, and I tell my husband that, and whoever will listen to it, is that, you know, we got a chance to help co-sponsor the free phone calls, right? And I say the irony of things because I paid for phone calls all the way till the end. So we really didn't get to experience the free phone calls, but because I know what we went through as a family, that it's important to continue in the work. I could have easily, or he could have easily been one to be like, okay, you're out, we'll see you later. But that's not the case. The case is that things need to continue to be changed. You know, the phone calls, when she started getting a little older, she would run to the phone and she would be like, pa, my phone. And I would answer the call and they would be having a full on conversation. And at the end, I had to remove myself without removing myself and allow him to parent her through the phone, to parent her through letters. The letters stopped for me and began for her. But at the end of the day, that's the least I could do for her and the least I could do for him, because I could easily say I made a decision, we made a decision, and we had her out of a miracle, not because I planned it. And out of a miracle, we conceived her in prison. And when I was 8 months old, I was going into contractions in the visiting room, and he told me, "Don't come back." He said, "Don't come back. You're going to have her here." And I thought it was the funniest thing because I said, "We'll just buy a t-shirt that says made in Lancaster prison, born in Lancaster prison." But he didn't think it was funny. He didn't think it was funny. So I just, after that, like, I didn't end up going back until I had her. And I could hear it in his voice that he was missing us. And so when she was exactly 3 weeks old, I took her and he met her. And it's so important to keep that connection. But now, thank God that there is free phone calls, but just that money gets allocated into other things, you know.
You know, I'm speaking of those connections. I'm so curious. I've never heard of potty training through, you said stick figures? How did you do that? Do you all on the inside give each other tips, like parenting tips through incarceration? How did you come up with that?
So during visit, that's how I was parenting her through the visit. So we would draw stuff, and I remember there was one time that I think that's what I drew, a little toilet, and then with a little swirl with little flies, and she covered her nose and she said, "Stinky, stinky," and I was like, she gets it. And then I developed her own character, which was just a triangle with her dress and big long pigtails. And for every character, that's who she was. So then there was and it was literally stick figures. But then I started doing the potty train, then arrows. It was always arrows equals candy, equals money, equals a bike. And it was always all these gifts. And then she always loved, because my wife's thing was taking her to Macy's. So she would call it Twinkle Star. But what I really, really, really imparted upon her, I would start doing little clouds. And I really engaged her imagination to the point where everything had to be imagination, and the power of imagination leading her to prayer. So I remember when we would be at the vending machines, my wife would go along with me. I would tell my daughter, "Close your eyes," and I would point to put my fingers on my temples and power, power, power. 1, 2, 3, and my wife would press the button, and I would clap my hands, and wow, she used her imagination to get the snacks right. So I remember once, so we had some M&Ms, and I gave her, I was like, "Come on, we're gonna use the imagination, right?" So I put, like, we used it. There's 3. And she said, again, close your eyes. Imagine. And there are some more. And eventually they ran out. So when I walk away to go use the restroom, my wife's telling me that she's using her imagination and she's saying it's not working, it's not working. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful to teach her through those stick figures, and also the time that I was able to spend with her in the visiting room, and a lot of those things that I would draw her, as far as like us going to Twinkle Star, now we get to go together. And to me, that's amazing.
It's a story of like resilience and patience and love. I really appreciate everything y'all shared. So I wanted to ask, is there anything that we missed or what you'd like someone to take away from the episode who may not have this experience? Anything that you want to share with the audience?
I will, but by no means am I trying to say that it's a bad thing and don't do it. There's just certain traumas that happen when you're in prison, and certain traumas that our loved ones experience by going through the whole process. Today, somebody was talking about their dress code and so I told somebody, I said, if somebody compliments you twice, you know you have to be looking fly. And I said, people don't understand that us that were deprived from wearing certain clothing, some of us develop traumas. Well, my daughter, her trauma was that every single time she left that visiting room, she would start crying and she would lose it. And she would start telling the guards, like, why doesn't he want to come home? They don't understand. They don't understand. So when I got out, it was I couldn't leave the house because in her mind, I wasn't coming back. I wasn't coming back. And I believe that there's a lot of children that go through that. Every day, it's like something gets torn. They have a beautiful time with us. Everything's laughter. It's beautiful. And then it's time to go back home. And it's not easy for them.
I'll say this, the only thing I could say, and I would want everyone to know, is that though we go through the process, we went through the process, and we aren't in a process, don't give up. Don't give up on that process. And throughout the easy process or the hard process, we're made of something. Sometimes it makes us strong, and the system doesn't own us. We own the system, and we're a family. And I did everything possibly that I could to keep us connected and to keep us together.
The one thing I'd like our listeners to walk away with is that there are millions of families of children going through this every day. So as you're learning about abolition and listening to this season and just in your everyday life, please know that these stories are not unique. And again, thank you so much, Sandra and Jesse, for joining us today and sharing your stories with us.
You've been listening to Abolition is for Everybody. Be sure to follow us at @abolitionis_ on Instagram, Facebook, and X for regular updates.
To support, please rate and comment wherever you listen to your podcasts. Those 5-star ratings help our people find their way to us. So thank you.